The Johannesburg High Court has dismissed the party's bid to interdict next week's sitting. The MK has sought to have the Judicial Service Commission interviews to be halted, and while they appeal an earlier ruling that's barred Hlophe from partaking in the process. The MK party still maintains that its parliamentary leader, impeached Judge John Hlophe, deserves to be part of the Judicial Service Commission interviews. Now, joining me to expand a little bit further on this and to weigh in on this, I now have Kevin Smith in the studio to speak to us a little bit more on the recent events. First and foremost, I mean, JSC interviews to go on without MK party's Dr. John Hlophe. What's your analysis on the court's judgment?
I think the court actually made a very insightful judgment in that it had managed to compartmentalize what the issues in this process actually are. The MK had said that with Dr. Hlophe's absence, it would be improperly construed. But the court rightfully pointed out that it being construed in a certain way is not necessarily the fault of the JSC, because the JSC asking for his absence is not the JSC acting in its own instance, but it's in fact following court orders. And those court orders are valid until they have either been overturned or the final decision has been made. So I think the court has actually applied itself very quickly to such a matter on such urgency. And I think the JSC, as it should proceed next week. And if anything, the final hearing of these matters should then give finality as to whether Dr. John Hlophe is rightfully someone who should be part of the JSC. And if not, how does that replacement actually take place?
All right, we spoke to an MK leader yesterday. Let's take a look at what he had to say.
We're disappointed at the outcome. You know, especially taking into consideration the kind of submissions that were made and the interaction with the judge himself. But more so in a sense that, you know, the judge here had an opportunity to, in effect, ensure that these sittings that are going to happen from the 7th, and those judges, in effect, are not tainted off the back of a process that is, in effect, quite honestly, quite unconstitutional. So that's our biggest issue. And instead, it takes this hot potato and sends it back to his colleagues in the Western Cape High Court to say, well, you created this mess, you sorted out. A nominee, in this case, Dr. Hlophe, that was nominated by us to participate in the JSC sitting. And there was a vote. And he was nominated to sit there. That was the political process. That is a process that was democratic within the National Assembly. Now, you know, you find the DA using the courts, you know, for its side shows to deal with political scores. And that's what's happening. And that's why we've been calling to say we need to change this system. We are the lawmakers as parliamentarians. We make the law. The judge's responsibility are to ensure that the law is implemented according to the framework of the law that we set.
And that, of course, is the MK's spokesperson, Nhlamulo Ndlela. They're crying foul. Would you say, indeed, that the DA and MK party's JSC case is a political play or a genuine concern for judicial independence and accountability?
I think, given the fact that we're in, so to speak, uncharted waters in the JSC having been construed with a former impeached judge, this is something that we have to have decided in our courts. And the reason is that because it hasn't come up in the past doesn't mean that it may not come up in the future. So a case of this nature is actually important for the JSC's functioning in the future itself, not just in its current instance. And because, like I said, we have never been in a situation where our courts or where our constitutional dispensation has to deal with a former impeached judge actually sitting as part of the JSC, it would have become a problem in the future in any event. So I think outside of it being in the realm of politics, it was important for the JSC as a whole, and it was important for the confidence in the public in the JSC itself, because what we have seen is that one of the critiques that was raised is that if someone who is being found of gross misconduct does in fact form part of the JSC, does that not erode the confidence that the public may have in the JSC's functioning? And because the JSC's function is not just one of the appointment of judges, but also on the ethics and upholding the conduct of judges, it performs a very public function. So for that reason, I think it was important that something like this has to be deliberated upon. Whether the decisions in the prior case and in this, which has just been decided, are fully valid and are fully backed by all political parties is neither here nor there, because it's a matter of public importance, and it's a matter that needs to be adjudicated upon for the sake of the JSC's independence and for the sake of the confidence that not only the National Assembly, but more importantly, the citizens can place in the JSC itself.
And Kevin, how do you think that this judgment might affect the MK party's strategy moving forward?
I think that comes down to how they actually assess the merits of this case. Because the MK party feels that Dr. Hlophe's absence means that they are being themselves prejudiced. But I think that's not necessarily the point here. What the point is that this isn't a final order. There are still other cases that need to be heard on that validity of his appointment, and that needs to be sent back to the National Assembly at some point. So I think at the most, what it does is it inconveniences their strategy, but I don't think it is something that goes against the MK party itself, because in their papers, they had said that Dr. Hlophe's absence also now taints the appointment of the 5 other appointments made from the National Assembly. But in this judgment, the judge rightfully points out that none of those other appointees have the mark of being impeached or have the mark of being found guilty of gross misconduct by the JSC. So it's something that applies very subjectively.
I hear that, but what are the potential long-term implications for Dr. Hlophe's political career and reputation? I mean, both within the MK party and in the broader political landscape.
I think it doesn't have much bearing at all. If we look at the JSC itself, it's technically a portfolio committee, but not the same as all of the other portfolio committees that exist from the National Assembly. This does have a more subjective approach, and it does have a more subjective nature, being that it deals with the judiciary and being that it deals with a branch of government that performs a very public function. So it is something where your appointees need to have a certain level of either ethical conduct or a certain level of expertise in order to make sure that that portfolio committee functions well. So I think outside of the JSC, it shouldn't have much of an impact, because he still has the right to serve in Parliament. He still has the right to be in the National Assembly. But I think for a very subjective portfolio committee like this, these implications do then taint or hamper his performance. And we are yet to see if the courts agree with that or not. The courts may find that he's in a position now where he can still perform those functions without them having a tainted shadow over him. So once those decisions have been made, I think this thing will then clear up the rest of his political strategy going forward.
Now, yesterday, Bosta leader Mmusi Maimane expressed his opinion that Parliament should handle its own issues internally and not involve the courts. Now, do you think that Parliament has the capacity to resolve its own problems and that courts' intervention is unnecessary?
No, I don't think Mr. Maimane is actually being forthcoming with that assessment. And the reason why I say that is, if you look at how the Parliament and the National Assembly is construed in the first place, it's construed by virtue of the Constitution itself. Now, this is not to say that people in Parliament do not understand the Constitution, but an interpretation of the Constitution, as we are seeing now, is better dealt with in the court system, where you have specialist judges who can actually deliberate on those issues. The other thing that comes into play is that because we have such a fractured government, a so-called government of national unity, how do we then find the consensus on decisions being made? Because we can already see right now, the MK and everyone else who backed the nomination of Dr. Hlophe felt that it was fine for him to be in the JSC in the first place, while they had opposition from the other side of the room. So we would be in situations where we always have parties at loggerheads to make these decisions, and it would slow down these decisions actually being made, whereas in the court system, the court is actually constituted to deal with this thing on a basis of urgency. And like we've seen, it came within the week, it was dealt with within the week, an order was given, and now we have finality on how to go forward. So I think when it comes to specifically constitutional or specifically legal issues, we have a properly constituted judiciary in the first place to deal with these types of things. If we leave that to Parliament, or if we leave that to the government itself, we are actually placing ourselves in a situation where we are thinking that their consensus would be informed consensus, where they might be making decisions based on political strategy and not based on the functioning of the law or the functioning of the Constitution.
Wonderful. Kevin Smith, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me, ma'am.